Amen. You can be seated. Our theme for this series that we started last week is Restart. And what we're looking at is some of the areas of our life or our faith that maybe we need to hit the restart button on. The truth is, we go through a lot of different things in life. And, a lot of us, when we give our life to Jesus Christ, certain things start to go a certain direction and we feel like, yeah, it's working. Yes, this Jesus thing works, this church thing works, and it seems to be going in a certain direction. But then every one of us at some point, if we're living it a certain way, we reach this place where our faith starts to falter a little bit, where our faith struggles in some way, or we have a doubt, or we get confused, or we wonder where God is and why he's not showing up in a certain situation, why a certain prayer is not being answered. And today, it's pretty self-explanatory, but we're going to talk about restarting our faith and kind of hitting the restart button on our faith and what that looks like when you need to kind of rebuild that and where did it go. And we're going to look at the book of Joshua today. And it's a book that really has a special meaning for me. I've read it, I've studied it quite a bit. And in these early chapters, what you have this time of transition for the people of God. You have this time where everything's about to change, and that's the moment we're going to read about today. I know a lot of us going through life, we reach a place where there's change coming. We go through transitional moments. We go from one season to the next. There's something that's going to shift as we go from today to tomorrow. I know a lot of times that change is hard, and that transition brings a lot of difficulty and struggle. But at the same time, one thing I've noticed about myself and most people that I know is every time that we go through a time of transition, every time that we change in some way or go from one chapter to the next, that's the place where God most often shows up. It's the place where God most often uses it as an opportunity to do something new in our heart and our soul and just to build us in a new way. And so we have this transitional moment that we're about to read about in the book of Joshua. If you want to get ahead and turn there, it's Joshua chapter 3. And it's also on your outline, and it's going to be on the screen, so there's no way you can miss it. If you need a Bible, there's Bibles under the seat in front of you. You can grab one. And in this moment that we're about to read about, there's a transition happening. They're transitioning from the leadership of Moses to the leadership of Joshua. They've been traveling from bondage, out of slavery from the Egyptians, with Moses as the leader of the people, and he's taken them out of captivity, and he's taking them toward freedom. He's taking them toward the promised land. He's starting to form them as a nation, but they're still wandering in the wilderness, and they're wondering what's next, and they're trying to figure out what's coming. And so Moses took them into forming into a people, but they're still wandering. And then Joshua is the guy that actually leads them and takes them into the promised land and forms them into a nation in a much more profound and concrete way. And so I'm going to read starting in verse 1 of Joshua chapter 3, and we'll pick this apart for you. It's a lot at once, but then we'll dissect it together. Verse 1, early in the morning, Joshua and all the Israelites set out from Shittim, yes, that's how you say it, and went to the Jordan, where they camped before crossing over. After 3 days, the officers went throughout the camp, giving orders to the people. Here's what they said. When you see the ark of the covenant of the Lord your God and the priests who are Levites carrying it, you are to move out from your positions and follow it. Then you will know which way to go, since you have never been this way before. But keep a distance of about 1,000 yards between you and the ark. Do not go near it. Verse 5, Joshua told the people, consecrate yourselves, for tomorrow the Lord will do amazing things among you. I want to stop there for a second because some of you need to let that verse kind of soak in. Some of you are kind of living in today or tomorrow or yesterday or today, I should say, and you're kind of wondering if there's going to be good things tomorrow. I know some of you are in that situation because we have a lot of conversations, and it's this season where you feel like, something's got to change, something's got to come, there's got to be some kind of transition, but I don't know what it is. I'm struggling to figure it out. And you're in this position where I don't know how this is going to look tomorrow, and I want it to be amazing, and I want it to be beautiful, but I just don't see it yet because I can't see more than 10 feet in front of me. And so I want to read this verse again and just kind of let this soak in. Consecrate yourself, for tomorrow the Lord will do amazing things among you. That tomorrow will be filled with amazing things that could only be known or described as coming from the hand of God. Some of you need to believe that. Let me keep reading. Verse 6, Joshua said to the priests, take up the ark of the covenant and pass on ahead of the people. So they took it up and went ahead of them. And the Lord said to Joshua, "Today I will begin to exalt you in the eyes of all Israel, so they may know that I am with you as I was with Moses. Tell the priests who carry the Ark of the Covenant, when you reach the edge of the Jordan's waters, go and stand in the river." Joshua said to the Israelites, "Come here and listen to the words of the Lord your God. This is how you will know that the living God is among you, and that he will certainly drive out before you the Canaanites, Hittites, Hivites, Perizzites, Girgashites, Amorites, and Jebusites." Say that 10 times fast. "See, the ark of the covenant of the Lord of all the earth will go into the Jordan ahead of you. Now then, choose 12 men from the tribes of Israel, one from each tribe, and as soon as the priests who carry the ark of the Lord of all the earth, set foot in the Jordan, its waters flowing downstream will be cut off and stand up in a heap." So that's where God steps in. "So when the people broke camp to cross the Jordan, the priests carrying the Ark of the Covenant went ahead of them." Now this next line, I love this little interjection here, and I don't want to just read it casually. I want you to understand why I think it's in there. I think that Joshua wants us to feel the full force of what's actually happening here. Okay, I think that this part matters more than we think, and he wants us to understand what he's experiencing. He says, "Now the Jordan is at flood stage all during harvest." Because in other words, some people could hear this story and, well, God's asking them to go stand in the river and cross this Jordan River to the other side to get to the land they need to occupy. But what's the big deal about that? It's just a river. You know, we have a little river around here. It's not that big a deal. You could cross it. As long as you can swim, you're good. Sometimes it's shallow enough just to wade across it. It's not a big deal. But no, Joshua, for some reason, wants us to know the Jordan River is at flood stage right now. It's at flood stage. So it's raging. It's deadly. It's dangerous to cross it. And I think he just wants us to know we're not embellishing the situation. I want you to understand it's at flood stage during a harvest. So, in other words, God's asking us to do something, and his timing is pretty bad. His timing of wanting us to cross this river right now is not good because it's at flood stage. And so, let me finish reading, and then I'll interject some more. "Now the Jordan is at flood stage all during harvest. Yet as soon as the priests who carried the ark reached the Jordan, and their feet touched the water's edge, the water from upstream stopped flowing. It piled up in a heap a great distance away at a town called Adam in the vicinity of Zarethan, while the water flowing down to the Sea of Arabah, the Salt Sea, was completely cut off. So the people crossed over opposite Jericho." They crossed the river. Last verse. "The priests who carried the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord stood firm on dry ground in the middle of the Jordan, while all Israel passed by until the whole nation had completed the crossing on dry ground." I love this particular moment in the history of the people of Israel because I think it unwraps so much of the mythology that maybe some of us have about the concept of who God chooses to use to accomplish things and what's going on inside of those people. I think that we miss that a lot in Christianity because if all we had in the scriptures were these descriptions of extraordinary feats and extraordinary acts and these men and women doing these huge things, I think we would feel like, well, that happened back then, but those were Bible people. You know, that happened back then, but these were characters in the Bible days, and God was moving in this way back then, and, you know, he doesn't do that kind of stuff now, and we wouldn't feel much commonality with the people that we're reading stories about. Like, there's no place we can actually identify with these people. And I think some of the reasons that God places these particular stories sometimes and these people and these details in the scriptures is so that we can see into the soul of the very people that he's using and so that we can connect with them and understand that in a lot of ways they're not that different from us today. And this was a moment for Joshua, you're going to see in a minute, where he had to actually hit the restart button on his faith because his faith wasn't enough for what was coming. Which seems kind of unexpected because this is the guy that traveled under Moses. Moses, you know, the guy that had the staff and the Red Sea parted and he saw God move in powerful ways. And, you know, you would think if anybody that worked with Moses and traveled with Moses and knew Moses personally and saw those things happening at that time in history, you would think that they would have a faith that could not be broken, that they wouldn't need any encouragement for their faith. I mean, if you were there in slavery to the Egyptians, and you were actually there to experience the 10 plagues that just pounded and pounded and pounded against the hardened heart of Pharaoh and the most powerful man in the world at that time, and the Egyptian army chasing after them and watching God break them down, and finally they're released from bondage, that would be enough to give you faith for a lifetime, wouldn't it? Not if you read the story. Not if you actually read what this book says. You find that even the freed Israelites that are finally experiencing freedom, they lost their faith. And they even started forgetting everything that actually was happening in Egypt when all they could think about was escaping. And they're saying, hey, can we just go back to Egypt? I think that was better. Can you just send us back to slavery? Because that was better than this, because we don't even know where we're going now, and we need food and all this stuff. And they're saying, man, it was much better in Egypt than it is out here in the wilderness. Let's go back. And you would think that it would be enough that God revealed himself, if you read this whole story, in a pillar of fire at night and in a pillar of cloud during the day, and he would literally guide them with these visuals that he would give them and speak to them in the desert, and you'd think that would be the kind of experience that would never cause you to lose your faith again. But no, not actually if you pay attention. Because it seems as if the moment the fire went out, the moment the cloud disappeared, the day cleared up, they completely, immediately, almost forgot who God was. And their faith started to falter. If you had an experience every day where this bread-like stuff would fall from heaven and you called it manna and you'd be able to eat it when you were hungry, and water would come out of the rocks when you were thirsty, and God would guide you and speak to you, you'd think that you would never again doubt the reality of who God is, but that's not the case here. With our faith, in some ways, it's as if we leak. Like our faith is filled up and we feel full of faith, but then we start to leak. And it's like, where did our faith go? And why is it leaking? And why don't I have as much as I did back in that season? And why am I questioning things? And why am I angry at God? And all these questions that we have, and that no matter how much faith God places inside of you during the beginning or during certain seasons of your life, no matter how much proof God gives us of who he is, no matter how good he is, no matter how much experience he gives us of himself, it's almost as if for some of us, as soon as the sun rises again, we begin experiencing doubt and fear and wondering why our strength isn't as strong as it should be. And I know some of you are thinking, man, this is a discouraging message. Why did I come today? But I actually think this is one of the most encouraging stories you're ever going to hear before we're done with it today. I find this incredibly encouraging to realize that, hey, if you're here and you need to reboot your faith and push that restart button, if you've ever wondered, man, how did I lose that? Where did it go? How could I be where I am right now when I was here? And maybe you've made so much progress in your life, but now you're up against this wall where you're just struggling all over again. You're coming up on a change or a transition, and you just can't figure out how you're even going to get through it because it's so different. I'll be real with you every time I'm up here. I don't know if you're like me, but sometimes I feel like on the scale of 1 to 10 on the faith meter, I feel like I'm like a 12. And everything's just going in that direction, and I'm trusting God in every difficult situation, and even the painful stuff in life, I'm just still choosing to trust him, and I see him come through at just the right time. But then there's other days, if I'm being honest, where it's like the whole meter shifts, and it's like not only am I maybe at 1, but I'm like negative. And I'm not believing God's going to come through, or I'm not trusting him in some way, or I'm not talking about the idea of my faith and what I believe in. That doesn't really change for me. I'm talking about the application of my faith, of actually putting my trust in him even when I'm walking into difficult things or struggling in some way, and the practical application of faith. And, I think it's safe to say that every one of us at one time or another, we find ourselves needing to hit the restart button on our faith and have a second shot at it, and where we have to go through almost this, it's painful sometimes, but this self-evaluation where we look inside ourselves, and it takes strength to do that, where we realize, oh my gosh, our lives are kind of in the same trajectory, the same pattern, following the same rhythm as the rest of the world. And as Christians, we're called to actually live differently and look differently than the rest of the world. We're not supposed to do things the same way, and everything should look different than the world, not be the same texture as the world. And when we realize that, oh my gosh, my life in so many ways and it kind of looks like all of them, whether they have faith or not, there's something off with our faith. And we need to figure that out. And I think sometimes God does these things where he disrupts us and causes us to realize we need to hit the restart button in our life and in our faith and start to engage our faith again in a way where maybe we did when we were younger or when we first believed, but it's kind of gotten stale. And we've kind of lost some of the meaning behind it. And I think for Joshua in this part of history, there's several things here, and I'm pretty sure these same things affect us in our daily lives as well, so I'm going to try to pull them out for you. But I think Joshua had this moment where he had to reboot his faith, and I think that it was because God was removing some things from his life. I think that you're going to see here that God removed some things that were providing Joshua with a sense of safety and security and even comfort. And God just takes him away all of a sudden, and Joshua has to now figure it out on his own and realize that he was kind of going in a direction where he wasn't owning his own faith yet. He wasn't doing that yet for himself. And so there were some things that were kind of helping him along in his faith that God allowed to be there, but those things weren't really pushing him to like a more passionate, higher expression of his faith. And those things kind of started to go away. So let me show you some of that. If we go backwards, kind of rewind into chapter 1, the very first book of the entire book of Joshua, very first line, it says this: after the death of Moses, the servant of the Lord said to Joshua, son of Nun, Moses' aide, Moses, my servant, is dead. It's a super optimistic way to start a book. And like instead of beginning with the conversation about faith or something God's inviting Joshua into, which is this big calling, instead, Joshua writes what basically painted the backdrop of what would be his entire life if you study his life. He was in a crisis, a life crisis, a faith crisis. The person who he had trusted, the person he depended on, the person who led him, the person who he was able to follow this other man's faith and feel like he was part of that is dead. He's gone, Moses. And he had seen time after time this guy Moses ascend up and down the mountain and experience God's presence. And he would come down, it says, glowing from the presence and the glory of God when Moses would interact with God. This was the Moses who brought down the commandments of the living God to the people. And this is the Moses who would have literal conversations with God, and the Moses that talked to God like he was a friend, and now he's gone. That's how the book starts. Moses is dead. He's gone. And as courageous as Joshua had probably been up to this point, and as much faith as he had had and expressed up to this point in his life, this had to be one of those moments where it just felt like the rug was ripped out from underneath him. I'm trying to put myself in Joshua's shoes here for a minute and understand, okay, Moses is gone, and he was the leader of the people. And all of a sudden, he's stripped of his faith in some ways because his faith was really an expression of Moses' faith, not his own. And I think a lot of us have been there or we're there now where our faith is more an expression of our parents' faith than our own faith. Our faith is more an expression of one of our leaders' faith than our own faith. It's an expression of a friend, or maybe your faith is an expression of your spouse's faith, but it's really not yours. Like if your spouse was gone all of a sudden, would you still be part of the church of God? If your spouse was gone all of a sudden, would you still follow Jesus and do the same things, or would everything look different? Would you walk away completely? Would you have a crisis of faith? That will tell you if the faith is your own and if it's genuine, or if you're just riding on somebody else's coattails. See, I think there's times where God allows us to almost have like a safety harness. And he puts this safety harness on us, and he allows us to be surrounded by people or circumstances or put in an environment where it's easier for our faith to be grown and developed and become what he always wanted it to be as it starts. And sometimes what happens is he builds these safety harnesses around us. So, for example, he doesn't cause you to lose your job right away, maybe. He doesn't cause your life to go into chaos or turmoil right away. And in fact, a lot of people that I see give their life to Jesus Christ around here, things do get better right away. And they all of a sudden see prayers being answered, and they feel God's presence, and they're excited about their new faith journey and all these things. And for a little while, it seems like, man, life just keeps getting better and better because now I'm a Christian. And it affirms their faith and helps them develop it in those early days. And you pray, and prayers are answered, and you move, and it feels like God is everywhere, and other people you know are coming to faith, and it just seems like everything's coming together. But then this thing called life happens, bam. And it happens to all of us, no matter how much faith you have, where it seems like everything is not coming together anymore. It feels in a lot of ways like I've been cut off. And now you're saying, wait a minute, God, what happened? I thought we were good. I thought we had a thing going on here, and this doesn't feel so good anymore. This feels like real life. This feels like life before you. It's very similar. And I think sometimes in life, we mistake God putting us in a sort of protected environment so that our faith can get to where he wants it to be in the beginning with the measure of our faith. And if you measure your faith on that, then when real life happens, and Jesus promised it would, your faith won't last. Because you put it in him answering every prayer as you want him to. You put it in the fact that everything needs to be comfortable and safe and secure and going a certain direction in your life instead of in himself. That he didn't promise you wouldn't face trouble in this life. He promised he'd be with you in the trouble. But sometimes we mistake that and we get confused. And so now this guy Joshua, he's kind of hit with this statement, this reality that, man, Moses, the servant of God, is dead. I wonder how many of us have that experience where it seems like God has removed the safety harness from our life. See, that's the first thing that you see sometimes when you realize you need to restart your faith, is when God removes the safety harnesses from your life. That what we thought was faith was really just maybe a primer toward our faith, but the real paint hadn't been put on yet, and so it wasn't real faith. And, when I was younger, I used to go to camp with my youth group. Every summer, we'd go up to camp, and they had a ropes course there. It was one of my favorite things to do with my buddy. Every summer, we'd go to camp. We'd do the ropes course, and we were really good at it, so we always made it to the end. We never fell off. And then you get to the end, and you get to do this thing where you just fall backward, and the guy lowers you down slowly. But there were these moments where I remember we were up on the ropes course looking down at the forest floor below, pretty high, and there were these moments where I would feel like, you know how fun it would be just to jump to our death? But it's okay because there's a safety harness. But we'd feel the adrenaline of that as we careen toward the earth. But we know we'd be okay because not everybody makes it. We'd seen the other kids do it. But then there was always this one moment where I would think, yeah, but what if I'm the one kid in the history of the camp that the thing breaks? And it just snaps and bam, I hit the dirt. And then they write articles about me and stuff. And they close the camp and all this stuff. And I think a lot of us in our faith journey, we struggle to take risks even when the safety harness is on, much less when God finally removes it and we enter real life. And there comes a time in everybody's life where God cuts the harness. There has to be a place in your Christian journey where eventually you're no longer strapped into the car seat, but you have the grown-up seatbelt instead. And you have to be willing to get away from the car seat and start to live in the mature place. And, you're at this place all of a sudden where God no longer allows your faith to be nurtured in this almost safe, protected environment that you started out in. And now you're in this place where it's just you and God all of a sudden. And that's the test of whether your faith is real. There will come a time in your life where if you take this faith journey seriously, you will feel as if you are entirely on your own with just you and God. Because everybody else on the planet, no matter how much they love you and how much you trust them, will fail you at times, but God never will. And you have to understand where to put your faith and where it needs to live. And these feelings, though, I believe is exactly what Joshua was feeling. This is what he's going through here. Moses was dead, and then the first words that Joshua remembers hearing himself out of the very mouth of God is this: Moses, my servant, is dead. Now then, you. It's your turn. It's your turn now to lead. It's your turn now to grow up. It's your turn now to take some responsibility for what I'm carrying out on the earth. And I think those words must have felt so heavy on Joshua's soul. And I know this, though. I think that in every one of our lives, there comes a time where God will call you to a choice. He'll call you to a direction. He'll call you toward a destiny, a change that you need to make. God will call you to a place that you have to journey to where you're absolutely on your own with him sometimes. And God will do this in your life so that you will learn to completely, utterly, solely depend on him. Because that's the only way you're going to go in the right direction. We come to this need to restart our faith, not just when God removes the safety harness, but I think also when life begins to demand more of us. When life begins to demand more of us. Let me take you back a little bit. We're going to rewind a little bit, and let's read a little more of chapter 1. So verse 2 we read, Moses, my servant, is dead. Now then, you and all these people, God's talking to Joshua, get ready to cross the Jordan River into the land I am about to give them, to the Israelites. I will give you every place where you set your foot, as I promised Moses. Your territory will extend from the desert to Lebanon, and from the great river, the Euphrates, all the Hittite country, to the Mediterranean Sea in the west. Last verse, no one will be able to stand against you all the days of your life. As I was with Moses, so I will be with you. I will never leave you nor forsake you. So now it's God's conversation with Joshua. It's his turn. And if you study it, this is a conversation that Joshua's never had with God. Joshua's had conversations with Moses. Moses had conversations with God, but now it's Joshua's turn, and he's now conversing with God himself. I'm sure that he talked to Moses about the journey of God's people and about trusting God and about moving in faith, but he's never had a conversation with God himself up until this moment. And now God is saying to him, Joshua, not only am I removing your safety harness now you're exiting the car seat. I've sent Moses away. You can't look to him anymore. He's no longer here. You can't trust in him anymore. It's just you. You're on your own. Now you have to trust me this time. But now God is saying, at the same time as I'm removing that safety harness, I'm also now demanding more of you. And I'm requesting more of you than I ever have asked of you. Are you willing to step into it? And I think in our world, today especially, when we talk about these kinds of things, even in our churches sometimes, it's like, it's so self-indulgent. We talk about it from such a individualistic, all about me place. You know, like, I don't want to study the Bible unless I see how it applies to me. I don't want to study the Bible unless it makes my life better. I don't want to, and the truth is, you don't really reach maturity in your faith and a healthy place in your faith until you realize that having a strong faith is about taking responsibility and stewardship for the lives of others, not just yourself. And you're loving others, and you're serving others, and you're being generous with others. And so, he's having this conversation now with Joshua because it's Joshua's responsibility at this time to now lead the people. Moses is gone. And there has to come a time in your faith journey where your faith is not just about you anymore. There has to come a time where it's not just about the pursuit of your dreams and your preferences and your ideals and your desires and your goals. There has to come a time where it becomes about serving others, and that we're responsible to do that as his people. And that as God is calling us to live in such a way that it pulls others with us. That the way that we follow Jesus, others follow Jesus because they're following us in that same direction. I don't know if you've noticed this before, but all throughout here and all throughout the history of God's people, people lead people to God. God leads people through people. God influences people through the people he has influenced. God builds others' faith through the faith he's already built in other people. We are a key component of this equation, and we have to live it in that way. And so you have to restart your faith sometimes where God not only cuts off the safety harness, but he also begins to demand more of you. And so I wonder if God is speaking to some of us today, myself included, saying, it's been good. I don't want you guys to hear me speaking negatively about any of your faith. I don't think that that's how God looks at it. I think God looks at us and says, your faith has been good. You've been faithful. This isn't an issue of good or bad. It's not an issue of right or wrong. This is an issue of past, present, and future. That what was working in the past doesn't necessarily work today and will not work for sure in the future. There has to be growth in your faith. There has to be the faith getting stronger. And in other words, what was acceptable in the past and what was good and faithful may not be as faithful in the present or in the future. I want to point out, it's not that Joshua is living a life here before this that didn't count toward God. It's not that God wasn't pleased with Joshua. Joshua was chosen because he had faith, not because he didn't have faith. Joshua was chosen by God because he was faithful, not because he wasn't faithful. Okay? He had that stuff going on. God didn't choose him for those reasons. But now he's saying, what you lived and how you lived here was great, and it was good enough for this season, but now there's a new journey I'm calling you on, more faith. Yesterday's faith is not good enough for today's journey sometimes. And so you need to increase that. And we need to hit the restart button on our faith because it's very likely that you're in a transitional period in your life where you're going into a new season of some kind. And if you're not, it's coming soon because we all go through these seasons. So God is saying to some of you, well done. You've done good. You've trusted me. You've been faithful. You've done a really good job up until now. But now there's more in the future. Now there's something tomorrow that you're stepping into, and I see more in you, and I'm expecting a little more from you, and I'm calling more out of your life because I believe in you that much, and I need you. Here's another one. Another reason that I think we need to restart our faith sometimes is if our faith never terrifies us. Let me explain that, because some people will disagree with that, and that's okay if you have just a feel-good, go-lucky Christianity, but that's not what this says. If your faith never scares you, if you never feel any sense of urgency in your faith, if sometimes you're not left like feeling, oh my gosh, with what's in front of you, I would challenge that maybe you're not living by much faith. I did a presentation one time when I was in college, and I hadn't done much public speaking at all yet at that point in my life, and I was pretty nervous. And I had a classmate ask me after that, hey, were you afraid during that? And I said, yeah, man, I was scared to death. I was scared to death standing up there and doing that. I'm always a little afraid when I do that, I said. And he looked at me as though this was like this incredible sign of weakness and just this visual display of my darkest faults, which it kind of was. And he looks me in the eye and he says, well, I'm never afraid when I do this. And I said, really? And he said, yeah, I'm never afraid when I make a presentation. And it occurred to me after seeing how poorly he delivered the presentation that if you're not afraid of something like that, you either don't understand how much help you need or how important the task in front of you is. See, if you're living your life and you're never afraid, if you don't get up in the morning with some sense of urgency, that I have to step into this moment and do it a certain way, that I have to do good for God today, that I have to understand that the gospel is an urgent thing that we all need to care more passionately about than anything else in our life. We have to feel that sense of urgency, and we have to, there's a reason that in the scriptures, one of the most repeated commands from God to us is do not be afraid. It's not because we're supposed to walk around living our life never afraid. He put that in there because he knew we would be often if we were living it his way. That's why he had to put it in there. It's a constant reminder to us, not a statement of if you're a Christian, you'll never be afraid. That's a twisting interpretation of that. What it's actually in there for is because if we're living it right, we're going to be afraid to the point where we need to be reminded of that again and again and again and again. And so there has to be this sense of desperation inside of us sometimes but at the same time, man, like fear wars against your soul sometimes. And when you're called, when you're invited into what God wants you to do and to live his way and do it a better way, when you step into the calling that God has for your life in the right way, I believe you're going to know some level of fear. It's kind of like that statement that says, don't be nervous if you're uncomfortable when you're following Jesus. Be nervous if you're always comfortable. Because if you're always comfortable following Jesus and you never run into any roadblocks, you're probably not following him. Because he promised you would run into those things. He also promised, though, that perfect love would cast out all fear, because God knows whenever he elevates his calling on our life and calls us to greater things, there's going to be fear, and so we have to hang on to that perfect love. And Joshua was afraid for good reasons, okay? While Moses just was wandering in the wilderness, which sounds bad, but he was wandering in the wilderness. Joshua was the one that had to fight battle after battle after battle. Joshua was the one that led the people into war. Joshua was the one that had to lead them in to take possession of the land. And there's a huge difference between the two. There's a big difference between fighting countless battles and wandering around in the desert. One last thought. You also need to think about restarting your faith when you already know the way. Let me explain that. When life is completely in your control, you probably need to restart your faith. When you feel like you can handle it all on your own and you don't need anybody else or God, you probably need to restart your faith. When, whether you've read this whole book or not, you think you have all the answers, you probably need to restart your faith. When you care more about being right than doing it God's way and loving people, you probably need to restart your faith. This little line in Joshua chapter 3. Consecrate yourselves, for tomorrow the Lord will do amazing things among you. There's a really cool, beautiful statement right before that. In verse 4, it says, then you will know which way to go, since you have never been this way before. If I haven't been this way before, I don't know where to go. But yet he says, then you will know which way to go, since you have never been this way before. Some of us need to restart our faith because we've lost the mystery of our faith. We've lost the beauty of our faith, and it's all become about right and wrong answers. It's all become about black and white. It's all become about the rigidity of truth instead of embracing the beauty and mystery of our faith. And the understanding that oftentimes God calls us to walk in a certain direction, and he doesn't even show us what's more than 10 feet in front of us, but he still calls us to walk that way obediently, trusting him even when we're blind to what's ahead of us. See, God is now connecting to this promise that he gave Joshua in chapter 1. Let me read it again. In verse 3, he said, I will give you every place you set your foot. In other words, Joshua, this is the way I'm going to work in your life. And it's not the way I worked in Moses' life. I'm going to do it differently now. And by the way, I'm probably going to do it this way for the rest of the history of the people with God, because the way I did it with Moses isn't the way I'm going to do it anymore. It's going to be different now. It was different. It was different than the way I worked in the life of Moses. You know, I gave Moses the staff. And there he was, and in a sense, I gave him different rules, and I had a different design on Moses' life. But, you know, in your life, it's going to be a little different, Joshua. Because Moses got to see my hand. And Moses got to come up on the mountain, and Moses got to stand on the shore and see the waters part as he stood there and just see the majesty and the glory of God, and all the people witnessed that. But it's not going to be that way for you, Joshua. It's going to be different. It's going to be everywhere you set the sole of your foot first, that will be the place that I give you. And you know what that requires, right? It requires faith. And it requires more faith than you've had up to this point, and it also requires my presence. See, a lot of us, I think we want God to do stuff in our life, and then we'll move in that direction. And that's kind of how it worked with Moses, if you look at it. But with Joshua, he's saying, no, I want you to go in the direction, and then I'm going to move and do stuff in your life. It's not going to happen like it did with Moses, Joshua. You're going to see me act, but first I want you to take some steps first and trust me that I'm going to act, because you're not going to get to see it first. It's different now. And so they go up and let's finish the story. They press against the Jordan River, and this becomes the design of Joshua's life, that wherever the soles of his feet touch, that place is given to him. And so they come up to the Jordan River, and God says, by the way, I'm not going to part the water until all the priests walk into the water. I'm not going to part the water until they're all standing there. When the soles of their feet hit the water, that's when I'm going to divide the water. Can you imagine the conversations with those priests? They had been with Moses, but now they're with this guy, and he's saying it's not going to be that way anymore. And now so Joshua's saying, okay, guys, this is how it's going to work now. I know that it's a little deep out there. I know it's harvest time, and the water's rushing, and it's raging, and it's going to sweep you away. And, you know, as I wanted for everyone who reads this for the rest of history to remember, the waters are at flood stage right now, okay? And so I know that it's dangerous, but God changed the design just a little bit. And so I know Moses got to stand there and look all glorious and majestic with the staff and the waters part, and they all like walk across looking at the walls of water like, oh, look at a fish, that's awesome, and just walking through and just seeing the glory of God before they ever have to even cross on dry land. But that's old school. This is new school now. Okay, this is how we're doing it from now on. This is the way God does it now. We actually have to step into the raging water and hopefully not get washed away. And when we do it, by the way, since you're the priest, you're going to go in first because you represent the people of God. And the moment the soles of your feet touch the waters will stop and part. And then we're going to pause, and we're going to do this little ceremony with some rocks in the middle of the river with the water raging just feet from us, because this is the design for the future of our faith now. And it's how it's going to work from now on. See, God needed them to change their mind about how God was going to act, because now they're no longer running from the enemy, they're running toward God. It's a different way of doing it. Now they're no longer trying to escape captivity, now they're fighting for their freedom. See, they're not being rescued from something now, they're being asked to do something and participate in the process, and God will slowly move as they're obedient. It's a different way to live. It's a different thing and this is kind of where it shifted and where it changed, and God needed to do something different in their soul. And so, again, sometimes you need to hit the restart button on your faith when you feel like life is too much in your control, when you already know the way, when it's so predictable that every day is exactly the same. See, faith is meant to be inseparable from uncertainty, inseparable from mystery, inseparable from taking risks. And your soul needs faith in order to be alive. Without faith, your soul is dead. And you know, I was thinking this morning about how we live in a world where there's so much human potential, right? Like so much talent and skill. Like there's some people over here that make like the best dessert in the valley, right? They make these waffle things with the ice cream in them, and they look so good every time I see them on Instagram. But then there's like people over here that can sing and play music, and it's like, man, God, where was I when you handed out those gifts, you know? Like I didn't get any of that. People elbow me when I sing. And then like we have people that can make movies. And do you know how much goes into that? And people who can build these skyscrapers in cities that don't fall over. And it's so advanced, the things that humans do these days. There's so much talent and skill in the world that it's just overwhelming sometimes. And sometimes you feel like, man, like where was I when that got handed out? But here's what I was thinking about. I was thinking about how in the kingdom of God, none of that even matters. It doesn't matter how talented you are, how prepared you are, how qualified you are, how skilled you are, how much experience you have. In the kingdom of God, the only skill that you really need is courage. In God's family, the only skill that you really need is relentless courage to walk in the direction He asks you to go, whether you can see the outcome or not. And that's often how He asks us to walk. That when you can't even see 10 feet in front of you, move in that direction and be obedient if that's what God asks you to do. We need to look at this line that says, everywhere the sole of your foot touches will be yours. And that's really been resonating with me lately. I believe that whatever endeavor I move into during the day, whatever conversation I have, whoever I come to interact with, whatever thing I have to try to accomplish, whatever emergency comes my way that totally derails my day and stresses me out, whatever thing comes my way, the person that reams me online or whatever, like all that stuff that comes at us, like whatever it is, just be willing to walk into it knowing that God's calling me to walk into it head on and that He's gonna give me everywhere that He sets my foot. And just trust Him in that. Because it really doesn't matter in this life, guys, if we achieve whatever we consider success or failure, or what the people around us tell us is success or failure, whether things go right in our mind or wrong. What matters is that we're living our life following God with this relentless courage that says, God, everywhere you send me is where I need to be. Everywhere I set my foot is where you want me, and I want this to become the reality of my life so that everywhere the soles of my feet touch, it will be mine. Because I want to wake up, and I want to consecrate my soul, and I want Him to do new things tomorrow that He hasn't done in the past. Because tomorrow I want to see Him do amazing things in my life. The band's going to come back up. We're going to close here. But let me just get personal for one more minute. Because I've lived this on both sides, so I can speak into it. And I'll tell you this, I am most fully alive. My soul is most alive when I wake up in the morning wondering if God's going to come through because of what I have to go do. I love living life in such a way where when I go to bed at night, I can look back at parts of the day and see certain things that happened where it's like, that could not have happened if it wasn't for God because it couldn't happen through me. I was thinking about how I'm often embarrassed by what it means to live a life of faith, if I'm being honest. I'm a thinking person. I don't know if you guys know that. I hide it well. But I'm a thoughtful person. Things have to make sense to me. My intellect is always causing me to ask questions about my faith and ask questions about God, and I want to understand things better. But at the same time, if I were to strip all of that away, if I were to take all that away and just kind of like bare myself before you, I would tell you this. I have lived out the principles of Scripture where God says, trust me, follow me. Everywhere you set the sole of your foot will be yours. And there are days that I have not. And I can tell you without a shadow of a doubt that if you will trust Him, if you'll hit the restart button, if you'll start new, you won't live a life that's easier, but you will live a life that's better. You will live a life that cannot be explained by your talent or your skill or your effort. And you'll start to see things happening here and there, just in the day-to-day, that couldn't happen if God wasn't present in your heart. And disclaimer, I'm not up here inviting you today to be a better person, to be a better citizen. It's not what this is about. I'm inviting you to a better way to live a life that is unexplainable except that God is in it. God, I just want to pray that every person here would just experience the wonder of faith, that they would be reminded of the mystery of faith, God, that you would just breathe a newness and a freshness into their soul, that you would ignite something new. And God, whether it's that they're starting to realize that life is demanding more of them, or they realize that their safety harness is now gone, or God, maybe they feel like they know too much, or maybe they need to have a greater sense of urgency in their faith, where they're fearing everything but you. And they need to shift that around and understand that they serve a holy God who is the King of everything, who is the Alpha, Omega, the beginning and the end, the first and the last, who every knee will bow at the end, whether they believe in him on earth or not, and acknowledge that you are the Lord, you are the King, you are the creator of the universe. God, help us to be people that live by faith every day. And may you increase our faith in full measure as we rise up to be the people that you've called us to be.